Hello everyone, my name's Charlotte Ashton from Farley Solicitors. I'm just going to do a quick update about how the Tier 2 visa works. This is the main visa for working in the UK. So I'm going to run through the various parts of it to explain what you need to go off and research so that you understand more about being able to be employed in the UK and maximise your chances of getting the Tier 2 visa. So a quick warning, as you may be aware, immigration rules change very frequently. I'm going to talk about the current immigration rules and what we currently know about the future system, which was announced last week, but which isn't yet drafted into law. Immigration rules and guidance documents are frequently updated, and it's up to you to make sure that you know the position under both the rules and following the guidance before you make any application. On our Farley social media, we do tend to share updates, particularly aimed at students and about moving into work visas. So follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and we'll be sharing updates there as and when we produce them. So the Tier 2 overview, this is a visa specifically for workers with a skilled job. The employer has to have a sponsor license, and there is a list of sponsors online. So one of your main points of reference is to have a look at that register of sponsors. You just Google Tier 2 register of sponsors. There's an online list of about 30,000 employers, and that will help you understand if the company you're approaching already has a sponsor license or if they would need to get one before they're able to employ you. The important thing about Tier 2 is that your employer is responsible for you whilst you're in the UK. Currently on your Tier 4 visa, it's the university who said we'll be responsible for knowing that this person is here studying and doing what they need to do for their visa. When you move into the work visa, that employer takes responsibility for you. You can switch from Tier 4. Switching is a specific term, meaning that you can remain in the UK on your Tier 4 and make a new application to move into Tier 2. This is important as a student because you benefit at the moment from not having to meet some of the stricter criteria for Tier 2. If you leave the UK and want to apply from outside the UK, you would be treated as if you were any other person outside the UK. For obtaining the Tier 2 visa, you need a certificate of sponsorship, you need to be paid the appropriate salary, you need proof of your English language skills and proof of maintenance, which means you've got the funds to look after yourself in the UK. We'll go through each one of these and explain it all in a bit more detail. So first of all, Tier 2, like I say, is a visa for a skilled job. And currently, that means it's level 6 or above. There's a useful document online called Appendix J, and that sets out a whole host of jobs, job titles, tasks and duties, and explains what skill level they are and the salary that would be appropriate for that job. The new changes, which are coming into effect on 1st of January 2021, will be changing that so that the skill level will be level 3 or above. This is particularly important for students because this now opens up the possibility of Tier 2 for entry-level jobs in marketing and HR, which historically have been considered too low skilled to be sponsored. So from 2021, there will be a much wider range of jobs for which you can be sponsored. You need to look at not only the title of the job, but also the tasks that are involved with that job, because you won't be sponsored for a Tier 2 visa if you have the job title, but you're actually doing very unskilled tasks. You need to check the minimum salary levels and the hours to be worked. There are two issues here. First of all, for Tier 2, currently, if you're outside the UK, you cannot get a Tier 2 visa unless you're paid £30,000 or more. If you're inside the UK and you're going to switch from a Tier 4 visa, you can be paid £20,800. Those are the thresholds. So whatever hours you're working, you cannot earn less than £20,800. Then each job itself has its own rate. So that's to say that accountants earn an average of one amount, solicitors earn an average of a different amount, managing directors earn a different amount. So each job has its own rate of pay. So as long as you are being paid the appropriate rate for the hours you'll be doing, and it's above the threshold, that would enable you to get a certificate of sponsorship. So the new entrant rate is what would apply if you're switching from Tier 4 to Tier 2, and that's a lower rate. And remember, it cannot be lower than 20,800. But when you extend your visa after your initial period, if it takes you into 3 years or more on Tier 2, you have to be paid the experience rate. So it's worthwhile looking and planning ahead and making sure that you know what rate you need to meet now and what you might need to meet in a few years' time. From 2021, there will be different salary levels, and points will be awarded depending on those salary levels. And it may mean that you can take a lower salary and have a job that would pay slightly less if you've got specific qualifications or if it's in a shortage role. So that's worth checking at the time when you're considering what job you're going into, what your qualifications are, and what salaries on offer. Here's an example of Appendix J. This is how it looks at the moment, and I've got a level 6 job there as an example. So you can see on the left-hand side, it gives the code that the employer would use in the certificate of sponsorship. So that's 2421. It gives the heading job title, so Chartered and Certified Accountants. It gives the example job tasks, so that's the really important bit that you would need to look over. And it also gives related job titles. So when you're looking at Appendix J, the first thing to do is click the menu which says Open All. That opens the entire appendix, and then you can use Control and F to start searching some keywords and key job titles so that you can start to narrow down what you're looking at. And then, like I say, at the bottom, it specifies the salary rates. So a new entrant in this would need to earn £21,000. So that's higher than the threshold, but that relates to 37.5 hours a week, because the source underneath then explains how many hours that relates to. So if you were working for 40 hours a week, you'd need to earn more. If you were working for less hours a week, you could earn less as long as it did not drop below 20,800. So that is quite a tricky thing just to get your head around, and it's something that employers do trip up on from time to time. So it's worth making sure you understand it, so you know that when you get your certificate of sponsorship, you're able to check that it's all been done correctly, so that your visa isn't going to be refused on the basis of any errors in the certificate of sponsorship. So the certificate of sponsorship is something that's assigned to you by the employer. There are currently 2 types. There's restricted certificates, meaning that the person being given that certificate falls within the annual limit of people who can have a Tier 2 visa, and unrestricted certificates. For restricted certificates, employers have to request these on a monthly basis from the Home Office. These are for people who are outside the UK or who are in the UK on certain types of visas. So that obviously means there's a risk that you may not get that certificate of sponsorship. Unrestricted certificate of sponsorships are those which the employer can just create and assign straight away to you. The good news is, if you're in the UK on a Tier 4 visa and switching into Tier 2, you can be given an unrestricted certificate. That takes out a whole step that the employer has to go to if requesting it, and the employer then just needs to log onto their system and create and assign it to you. One thing that you may have heard a lot about is the resident labour market test. This is where the employer has to advertise the job first to show that there's no one in the UK that can do the job. That is not required where you are switching from Tier 4. That gives you a much greater chance of being sponsored than if you were outside the UK. So currently at the moment, if you're outside the UK, they would have to go through that process of advertising the job. But as long as you're here on your Tier 4 and you're going to switch into Tier 2, it's not required. It's going to be scrapped completely from 2021, which is good news. So that should make that process a little bit easier, but it's not relevant to students at all anyway. The certificate of sponsorship gives you a unique number to then use in your visa application. You need one for your initial application, and then you also need one for an extension. The other important thing is that the certificate of sponsorship is for you to do the specific job for the specific rate of pay for the specific employer. If any of those change, it's highly likely you'd need to make a new application with a new certificate of sponsorship. So it's worth taking advice at any point if you're going to change employer or if you're getting promoted at work and things like that. Other requirements: English language skills form part of the visa process. Fortunately, if you're applying online in the UK and you're saying you're switching from Tier 4, this should be automatically recognised and you won't actually need to provide any evidence. If you do need to provide evidence, your degree can be used as evidence, but like I say, it should be recognised automatically. Maintenance is required for a Tier 2 visa as well. So you've got two options with this. If your sponsor is classed as an A-rated sponsor, which they will be because otherwise they probably won't be able to sponsor you, they can tick a box on the certificate of sponsorship which says they agree to certify your maintenance. That means that they would look after you if it was required for the first month of your stay in the UK. They don't have to give you any money. No money needs to change hands, but they're saying to the government, we would take responsibility so this person wouldn't end up on the street. If not, and some employers don't want to do that, you would then need to show that you've got the funds in your bank account to look after yourself and any dependents. So you need to show 90 days worth of bank statements, and they can't be any older than 28 days before your date of application. So you need to make sure when you're coming up to making your application, you've got those funds set aside, and that would be £945 if you're just applying on your own. And then for any dependent applying with you, you'd need to add another £630 to that. Other visa information, you must apply before the end of your current visa. But if you apply right towards the end, as long as you've submitted a valid application, you can stay in the UK whilst you're waiting your decision. If you then are rejected, you have a short period of time in which to challenge the decision. And if you don't get your visa, you would need to leave and then apply from outside the UK. The initial fee is currently £704 for up to 3 years in a non-shortage role. If the role is a shortage role, it's slightly cheaper for the visa. There is an NHS surcharge, which is currently £400 per year of your visa payable at the time of application. So if you're applying for a 3-year visa, that would be £1,200, and it's potentially going to increase to £625 per year, and that could happen at some point this year. So that's worth checking as you're coming up to making your application to make sure you've got enough money set aside for that. Dependents, you can apply for your dependents to stay in the UK with you or to come to the UK to be with you. That would include your spouse or your partner if you've been living together for 2 years or more, children under 18, and children over 18 if they're already here as a dependent. Each dependent will have to pay the same fee and also the same NHS surcharge. So if you're a family and you're here, you need to make sure that you're saving up enough to cover everyone's fees and the NHS surcharge, and having the separate amount to show that you've got enough money for maintenance. So some issues which could arise during Tier 2, like I say, the certificate of sponsorship is for you to do the specific job for the specific employer for the specific rate of pay. So if you're promoted and it takes you into a different code on Appendix J, your employer would need to give you another certificate of sponsorship and you'd need to make an extension application. If you want to extend your visa after the initial term, then again, that will require a new certificate of sponsorship. And if you are considering changing employer, you would need to make sure that your new employer could sponsor you and would be able to give you a new certificate of sponsorship. You would need to do all that before resigning from your current employer, because what you would not want to do is resign, not be able to find a new employer, and then your tier 2 would come to an end and you'd need to leave the UK. If you do leave the UK and your tier 2 expires, you're then subject to the tier 2 cooling off period. That means you're not allowed to apply for a new tier 2 visa for 12 months after your current one has expired, or you've left the UK if you left the UK a bit earlier. So that can cause problems if you are trying to change employers, you mistime it and you end up having to leave the UK. It might be something that's removed next year, but I've not seen anything that confirms that yet. So it's worth checking with someone if you are going to make decisions such as leaving employment. If you've been on tier 2 for 5 years, you can apply for indefinite leave to remain. That means you could stay and work in the UK with no time limit. Your employer would need to confirm that they still need you in your job, and there's an increased salary requirement. So as tier 4 students, you can take advantage of the new entrant requirement first. When you extend it, you would then need the experience rate. And then when it comes to settlement, there's a different amount for each April onwards for a year for how much you would need to earn to be to qualify for indefinite leave to remain. So indefinite leave to remain means that you can stay and work in the UK. It also means you could leave your employer and go and work for another employer, and you wouldn't have to go through the whole tier 2 process again. Once you've got indefinite leave to remain, it can only be lost through prolonged stay outside the UK. So if you went out the UK and stayed outside the UK for 2 or more years, you would lose your indefinite leave to remain. Once you've held indefinite leave to remain for 12 months, you could apply for citizenship. You would need to show good character, and things like your criminal record and tax records would be checked. You need to show that you'll continue to live in the UK. Currently, there's knowledge of English and life in the UK tests, but there's been talk about those being changed in future. And there's a residency requirement. So you need to show you've lived in the UK for at least 5 years before you apply, and you've not spent more than 450 days outside the UK during those 5 years, or spent more than 90 days outside the UK in the previous 12 months. You also need to show that you've not broken any UK immigration laws. So for example, that would be working illegally. So working more hours than you're able to on your tier 4 could be an example of that. But once you have citizenship, then obviously you're not under any kind of immigration control and you could have a British passport. Another route which we'll look at that's just an alternative for tier 2 but isn't yet in place is the graduate immigration route. This is a visa which would allow you to stay for 2 years after you've completed your course. You can work in the UK without needing a sponsor and without the job having a specific skill level. So it'll be really useful for students who are trying to get work experience before trying to get a tier 2 visa. It's for students who are graduating from summer 2021 onwards, but no specific date has been confirmed. Nothing's been put into law yet about this, so it's unclear if it means you have to graduate in summer next year to get it, or if you could graduate in December but still have your valid visa in summer next year. It will allow for switching to tier 2 like tier 4 does, but it's not clarified whether the new entrant rates would still apply. And it will not count for a 5-year route to settlement. So if you've got a choice between a tier 2 job and going on to the post-study work visa, if your long-term goal is to be in the UK and get indefinite leave to remain, you would want to go on the tier 2 route because that would start your 5 years towards settlement. And as with most of the visas, the NHS surcharge will apply, and there's been no confirmation of how much the visa fee will be yet. But that's something that's worth keeping an eye on, and we should hopefully get more details about that in the middle of March when the new immigration system is announced fully. We are able to take some questions. If you don't have a question now but want to email me, feel free to do so later on. And if you want to ask a question now, there should be a little box where you can type in. Okay. Right, so someone's asked, does the dependent have to work and get a visa of any sort? No. If you have someone who is in the UK as your dependent, as a points-based dependent, they have the right to work without needing to be sponsored in their own right. So they are here as your dependent, but they are actually able to go out and work for any employer and do any kind of job. Another question, if you apply for a post-study visa and then a master's, will I still be granted a post-study visa again? I don't know. I am assuming that there might be a provision to make sure you can only have one kind of bite of the cherry at it, but because there's been no law written about it yet, we don't know the finer detail of how it's going to work or how it's going to link in with other visa options. One thing to bear in mind is that even if the post-study visa doesn't count towards the 5 years indefinite leave to remain, if you add up your time on tier 4 post-study visa, masters back on tier 4 and then more work, it might be that you get to 10 years for indefinite leave to remain, which is another option, but just not one that I'd sort of covered for the purposes of this webinar. Right, I've got another question. My tier 2 general contract ends in June. Can I apply for tier 4 after my tier 2 expires as I am enrolled as a PhD student? Yes, you can switch back to tier 4 from tier 2. So you should check with your university team as to when they're going to issue you with a new CAS. What you need to do is make sure that you apply for your tier 4 before your tier 2 expires, so that you're linking all your applications together, so that you don't have any time where you have to leave the UK and come back. If I successfully get a tier 2 visa, can my parents come and work in the UK? Unfortunately, it's extremely difficult to bring adult relatives to the UK. If they are dependent on you and unable to get medical treatment or care in their country, there is an option for an adult dependent visa, but it's much more complicated than I can go into during this talk. But generally speaking, you can only bring your spouse or partner or your children. I've been asked, does my tier 2 3 years count for ILR? It would not count if you've then broken it. You would start again, but you may get to 10 years before you would get to the 5 years on the new tier 2. And someone's asked, how do I switch from tier 4 to tier 2? Do I do it online? Yes, you would go on to the tier 2 gov.uk page, and following through the various options on there, it talks about switching, and it says you must do it online and gives you an online link. The forms for inside the UK and outside the UK are slightly different. So you will know if you've gone on the wrong form, because the outside the UK one will not allow you to mark it as a switch from tier 4 to tier 2. So you will know you're on the right one because it will give you the option to switch from tier 4 to tier 2. So a question about citizenship after being in the UK for 10 years, but is it 5 years in work actually? There are two main routes to indefinite leave to remain. The first one is 5 years on certain types of visas. That includes the tier 2 visa, but it means 5 years only on that visa. So you can't change between different routes. It resets your clock every time. Or if you are changing between a number of different visas, it can be added up to 10 years, and then you can apply for indefinite leave to remain then. And in both cases, it's then another 12 months before you could apply for citizenship. I've got a question about switching from tier 5 to tier 2. Tier 5 does not allow to switch to tier 2. You will need to be treated as if you're outside the UK, and you would need to leave the UK to come back under tier 2. So you'd currently be subject to the resident labour market test and potentially the higher rate of pay. And another question about 5 years indefinite leave to remain, does it have to be continuous? Yes, if you've had 6 months or more outside the UK on that visa, that would break your time in the UK, or 18 months in total. And I'm just being asked to clarify a bit more about citizenship. In what circumstances do people have to stay in the UK for 10 years or 5 years? 5 years on points-based or family routes. So points-based means work visas, business visas where you're setting up a business in the UK, or exceptional talent, global talent visas. They would all lead to settlement after 5 years. 10 years would be any valid stay in the UK. And there's another question about, can you switch from tier 5 to tier 4 student visa? I'm not sure, I don't think so, but you could check with your university student visa team about that one. If you look on tier4gov.uk, there should be a switching link, and that would say whether you can or can't. I get the feeling you can't, but I'm not 100% certain. And I've just had a question about setting up a business in the UK. Which visas would you apply for? You would need to look at either the startup visa or the innovator visa, and there's information on our website about both of those, and your university should probably cover the startup visa as well, with some information on their website. So I've been asked whether I think it's going to be slightly easier for an applicant to get a job post 2021 if they're applying from within the UK than outside it. I think it's going to be made easier for those people outside the UK than it currently is for people outside the UK, but I still think it's going to be better to apply from within the UK. First of all, because you're just spending more time in the UK on valid visas. Second of all, you are spending more time in front of the employers, and it's easier to look for a job while you're here than it is abroad. And certainly if you're still here and you can take advantage of the graduate immigration route, that would make things a lot easier for you as well. I've been asked, are employers forthcoming for employing international students post-graduation? They aren't always. The best people to speak to about that are your careers team. It tends to be big employers with a reputation for employing international students, so the very, very big employers, which is really competitive. Niche markets where they need people with really specific technical skills, so they're more likely to want to sponsor you because they're finding it difficult to find people here. Or employers who you've already worked for who are really keen to keep you. I've then been asked about children who are born in the UK. They're still dependents unless they have a British parent. A question about starting a business in the UK, that would not be a tier 2. That's correct. Tier 2 is only for working in the UK. It is not for starting a business in the UK. You would need a startup or an innovator visa for starting a business in the UK. And is citizenship guaranteed after a 5-year stay in the UK? No, you need to spend 5 years to get indefinite leave to remain, and then 12 months to get citizenship. And it's never going to be guaranteed because it would all depend on your personal immigration history and the good character test and things like that. So thank you everyone for all your questions. If you've got anything else, please feel free to email me or email your university, and hopefully to be able to put you in touch with us. And yes, I hope that's been useful. Thank you.